CrowdStrike presents Driven in 60. Our digital world is more than just interconnected, it's interdependent. And because of that, security is a top concern for every organization. The Mercedes-AMG Petronas Formula One team knows they're a potential target for a host of digital attacks, which is why they leverage the CrowdStrike Falcon platform to deploy end-to-end security solutions. CrowdStrike revolutionized cybersecurity by harnessing the speed and power of the cloud to identify and stop the most sophisticated cyber attacks. Our cloud-native Falcon platform protects and defends organizations against increasingly complex threats, so you can have the peace of mind to focus on your business momentum, not what's trying to stop it. That's protection that powers you. To learn more and to try CrowdStrike Falcon free today, visit crowdstrike.com/XM. All right, Gearheads, we are very excited to do this podcast because this is a gentleman, our guest, is someone that I've been following and sneaking stats as much as I could from his social media. But I've been following him for many years, and I know you have too, Jonathan. And we want to welcome to the show, Sean Kelly, the virtual Statman. Hey, Sean, how are you?
I am living the dream, guys. How are you doing?
Doing great, except for the heat here in Austin.
Well, yes. Well, we've got plenty of heat here in San Diego as well. Even with the ocean, it's hotter than normal. But at least we're not on fire yet, which in California, that's a win. So, be grateful for small mercies, etc.
Well, we are on summer break, and we're all enjoying a little bit of calm downtime from Formula One. But you know what? You said San Diego, but you don't sound like you're from San Diego. Why don't you let everybody know your background?
Yeah, I'm really from San Diego. I just practice this accent all the time so that people don't know the truth. No, I'm from England originally, as most people probably be apparent. I came over to America nearly 20 years ago when I started working on the US broadcast of Formula One for Speed Channel, as it was back then, and have been here ever since. They were the first people to hire me in Formula One. I worked 10 years at Speed Channel. I moved when the rights moved from Speed Channel to NBC. I've worked for Sky since they started in F1 in 2012 as well. So when NBC pulled the plug on their F1 coverage in the US, I was in the weird position of already knowing I was still going to have a job. And that actually gives me the obscure distinction of being the only person the only person at all who's worked on every US Formula One telecast in the last 20 years, because I worked for Speed. I did the 8 shows that were on CBS in the mid 2000s. I did every race on NBC, and I've done every race for Sky. So I am unfortunately the line of continuity that goes all the way back to 2003 in US broadcasting history. What a strange claim to fame for somebody who's not even American.
But no, that's interesting, Sean, and yeah, I love that. That's a good stat. But it does also, the timing of what you do, being from England, where, let's face it, stats in all sports, it was only really when Sky started doing wall-to-wall soccer that they actually started employing stat guys to bring us and bring the commentators stats. And it's something that is, it's more foreign to a European audience, whereas here, as you well know, stats are king for every NBA game, every NFL game. It is, packed to the gills pre-show with stats, whereas motorsport is really just learning that art.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I look at contemporary Formula One broadcasting and compare it with how it was when I started, and I see where we've gone with it, and I wonder, have I ruined Formula One broadcasting by throwing stats at them all the time? Would it be better if I just shut up? But you are right. I mean, with the increasing amount of coverage and the increasing availability of just media in general, we've moved away from linear broadcasting. You've got second screen experience now. People don't just watch things on one screen. They like another screen in front of them with extra stuff, like the Formula One timing and scoring app, for instance. It gives more scope for this deeper dive that we can do on such things. And I would say in my job, in all seriousness, I often say there are times when you should just shut up. There's a time and a place for stats, and it's not the headline. It's not the reason people tune in. I've always said that statisticians, we are the ball boys at Wimbledon. If we do our jobs properly, it makes the event that you came to see better, but you didn't notice that we were doing the job. So that's our role in the event you've come to see. So we shouldn't be throwing numbers at the viewer and blinding them with this. It should always be something to complement, not to replace the entertainment you've come to watch.
Sean, my stats background, outside of my passion for motorsports and all things cars, growing up was NFL. And I used to have a book, the NFL stat book, that was a little paperback, but it was 400 pages. And as a young, middle schooler, I bet I knew 30% of that book by heart. I loved those stats. And like an example, I was watching an NFL game in the stands, and I was kind of keeping track of the running back's numbers while he was during the game. And I realized he set the record for the Dallas Cowboys for yards in a game. And I knew it in my head. And I kind of jumped up and went, that did it. And everybody's looking at me like, what are you talking about? And it took the announcer like 3 or 4 minutes to announce it. And I was like, so in here, to make Jonathan's point, stats, we're all thinking about them even during a race a lot of times. So I think it's a really important part of motorsport and all sports.
Well, John, the example you just gave is basically what was the incentive for me to get involved with Formula One, because people would watch, my friends and family would watch Formula One races with me. And I would be doing much akin to what you just described. I'd be saying, why haven't they mentioned this? Like, the Jordan team haven't done this since like 1994. Why are we not talking about this? And then, of course, 10 minutes later, it might come up. And people would say, you should try and get a job in it. Murray Walker's got to retire one day. They're going to need somebody. And I'd be like, oh, yeah, right. Who makes money doing that? You must be joking. Particularly because, I was from a neighborhood where people didn't do that. They either, they firebombed people's houses or sold drugs or this sort of stuff. It wasn't really the sort of neighborhood that, thought, what I'm going to do, I'm going to go into equestrian, or I'm going to become a sailor. It wasn't that sort of neighborhood. So it always seemed quite a pipe dream. And then circumstances dictate. I met an American girl, and I needed the ability to be able to visit her, basically. As simple as that, because she was in the US and I was in the UK. And I thought, well,
the odds are high in San Diego that could happen. That's a good stat.
Well, indeed. So I cold called Speed Channel. I didn't know anybody. I'd actually never been to a Formula One race. I'd watched every race on television, which has always flummoxed everybody. In the first season I worked in F1, like, you've never been to a Grand Prix? No, we didn't have any money. The first season I was in Formula One, I had a pair of broken spectacles that I couldn't repair because I didn't have any cash to do it. It's like, I haven't got money to go to a Grand Prix. You must be joking. So yeah, that's how it started. It was being like somebody who was interested. And you mentioned the book. That resonates with me because I had the International Guide to Motor Racing by Peter Heim, and
yes.
the first edition, and I read that thing. I used to colloquially call it the Bible. Like, go and get that book for me. It's being there. And I used to read it recreationally. I didn't use it as a reference book. To me, it was appointment reading. I'd sit there and flick through it and read everything in it. So I became very, very good at being able to recite all sorts of, weird and wonderful things. Like, the only sub 1 minute lap in Grand Prix history is 1974 French Grand Prix. All this sort of stuff, set piece stuff. So that's where I started from. And then when Frank Wilson at Speed Channel said to me, we can hire you. We can't give you much money. But in fact, I can remember he gave me the phone call. He said, I can only give you like $200 US, right? That he literally stopped there. He said, I can only give you 200. And I said, that's fine, no problem. Put the phone down, thought, cool. I'm going to get paid to watch Grand Prix. How cool is that? And then the second thought was, did he mean 200 a race or 200 for the season? It didn't clarify what he meant. He might have meant 200 for the season.
Or for the next 10 years.
Yeah, I didn't clarify length of time, what we're talking about there. But I went with it and I thought, okay, well, I haven't got any money now anyway, so whatever, it's 200 more than I've got. And then came that harrowing moment where I thought, hang on a minute, I am now writing stuff that's going out in a live broadcast for Formula One. So now we're going to find out whether I actually know what I'm talking about or whether I've been living a complete lie this entire time. And maybe I'm going to go back to washing dishes in a restaurant, which is, about the limit of my talent. So that was 03. It was literally transitioning from what you said, John, being the guy sitting there going, hang on a minute, that's a record. Why haven't they said it? To being the guy who tells the commentators, say this, it's a record.
Yeah, you know, and as a commentator, it's interesting because I struggle with good stats and bad stats, both that I collect myself in terms of obviously my preparation, but also complementing that with stuff you glean from people who do it professionally, whether it be from a book or whatever. And to give you just one example, you know, I did MotoGP for a while, and there's no question as a commentator, you arrive at a MotoGP race and they give you daily stats and updated stats to a point of no return, so that you can really look impressive to say, Quartararo has only finished in the top 6 in the last 8 races here at Kota type thing. But then also it annoys me because so what? A stat has to be both relevant, it has to be both correct and relevant. And I find that a lot of the stats I get plugged into or get pushed my way don't either fit the commentary, or I think, well, why is that going to change my commentary, or why is that going to be interesting to my audience in the middle of a race? So, you know, whereas as a storyteller, as I see myself in commentary, because I'm not a racing driver, I'm just trying to paint a picture. But what I think is interesting is, for example, Spa's coming up. What I would like to know is Michael's debut at Spa. How does Mick go? Does he score points? And is there a correlation there statistically that says, yeah, when Michael started his career, his first race at Spa, you know what I'm saying? Something that is, I can connect those dots between Mick and obviously Michael, but using that event. And so therefore move the story on by saying, well, Mick only finished 9th, but it's a point scoring thing. And of course, this is where Michael started. You know what I'm saying?
Yes, yeah, you're looking for context, historical context.
Yeah.
You don't want to just, I always say the numbers themselves are boring.
Right.
And it's our job to make them interesting. That's the thing. Because I say this to every broadcast. I mean, I work for 16 broadcasters in Formula One. I work for F1 themselves. 4 of the teams use me as well. So, you know, I've got plenty of people to talk to on these things. I could give you a stat pack that's 100 pages long, which is useless, completely useless. It's like, tell me what I need to know, not what, I don't need to know every single thing about the history of this track. You just give me it on a need to know basis. And Virtual Statman, which is the program I operate, hence my online handles, they, you know, the broadcasters log in and there's a screen in front of them, and I just put things on the screen as it's relevant, basically replacing the post-it note on the table as was. And I do give them a pack in advance, which is never bigger than 20 pages, 10 pages of the raw numbers and 10 pages of written data. So here's what you need to know session by session. You know, in Q1, let's make sure we say these things. If you want to talk about Lance Stroll, okay, go to Lance Stroll's bio. There's everything on him. Whatever you need to go to. And so the ergonomics are important. Where do you find everything? Do I know where I'm going to find this data in this 10,000 stat thing? But yes, it is important to keep it relevant to the narrative, you know. And I guess part of the reason why I get continued employment is knowing, okay, we need to say this right now. You know, Checo Perez is doing this, but this, yeah, you know, he's never finished in the top 5 at this racetrack. And then the context you're looking for there is, that's the worst record he has in Formula One. Every year he comes to this racetrack, he's no good. It's not like, oh, well, that's happened at 7 tracks. No, this is the one where you can't crack it. You know, every year it's terrible, this track. So you're looking for that added context as well. So, and then you go back to the whole the ball boy at Wimbledon analogy. You know, you don't want to overcook it either. You don't want to disappear down a rabbit hole numbers. It's not so bad when it's FP1 and, you know, there's no cars on track. It's like, okay, let's have a esoteric chat about something of yesteryear. But when you're in the middle of the Grand Prix and Verstappen and Leclerc are wheel to wheel, it's like, okay, shut up, let them get on with it, and we'll talk about it on the back end.
Yeah, talk about it in the post race. But
yeah,
you know, Sean, clearly you're great at this because of your passion. But you said something a moment ago that also tells me why you're great at it. And that is, you said that a harrowing moment when you're about to be quoted on the air across the world in all the English speaking languages, you were saying that's harrowing. In other words, you want it to be right. You don't want to put out bad data. And it's funny, I had a British commentator tell me that one time. He said, not to me personally, he said, American commentators typically are really good because you guys don't want to be wrong. And I when you said harrowing moment, I thought that's one reason why you're great, because you want to get it right.
Yeah, I think it's because I'm a poacher turned gamekeeper. I know I've sat on the sofa and said, that's wrong. What are they talking about? Why didn't they put it like, or why don't they add this context, which makes it so much more interesting thing, you know? So I'm always thinking that, and I will literally, after a broadcast, I'll be sitting there going, man, that one Nicholas Latifi stat. Why did we do it like that? Why didn't I say he hasn't done this, but he has done that? And literally no one else on earth is thinking this. No one else is thinking, well, that was a stupid Nicholas Latifi stat. But I'm sitting there going, okay, next time, let me change the, the flow chart of how we get this to air. Let's make sure, add this additional check on the database, and let's make sure that next time that goes out like that. So yeah, you're always thinking like that, because the thing is, it sounds pompous, but whether it's me or whether it's Lewis Hamilton, it's Formula One. There is no room for mediocrity, so you should always be thinking, how do we make this better? Every race, okay, there must be some marginal gain we can make to the next race to make it a better broadcast, to make the commentators more comfortable with what they're using. And it's not just the English language broadcasters. I mean, I know I work for French TV, for Austrian TV, for German TV, for Japanese TV. So trust me, I get it in both ears when something's wrong. I will hear about it well and truly. And then you've got the mothership themselves, of course. If they put something out on social media that I've said, here's a great stat, and it's wrong, and they get 6,000 comments saying, what? No, that's wrong. It's like, oh, well, guess who's going to hear about it?
You got to tell us one of those stories, one of the, of one time you got it wrong. That's got to be.
There's more than one. I mean, I don't know how much of this episode you want to take up.
Your favorite.
Yes, my favorite getting it wrong.
Most infamous.
Thankfully, there haven't been too many like real clangers in the last 20 years. Because normally, if something's wrong, it'll be something that's forgivable. Like, for instance, Sebastian Vettel hasn't made Q3 in the last 6 races, but actually it'll be the last 7 races, which is like, okay, that's just finger trouble. You just can't get wrong. But we get where you're coming from. He's on a bad run. That's what we're trying to say. It isn't like Sebastian Vettel's the first person in history to do this. Oh wait, apart from the other 26 people who've done it. That's a much more egregious error which you have to avoid. And you want to make sure when
Italian has never won this race. Oh.
Except last year. Yeah. So you've got to make sure those big calls are right, because those those are the ones that are going in the headlines. And you definitely don't want to get a call back on it and say, no, that was right. I'll give you a great example from the first year that I was in F1. It was the 2003 Italian Grand Prix at Monza. And at that point, the record, the fastest Grand Prix in history was Peter Gethin, 1971 Italian Grand Prix. It's about 151 miles an hour. And before the race, I had looked at the lap length and the lap distance and everything. I thought, okay, let's calculate the exact race time that would be necessary to break that record, because we are going to get close. 2002 had already been close. So I did that, ran the race. There was no safety car or anything like that. Schumacher wins. Stop the clock. Okay, it's 1 hour, whatever it was, 15, 14, whatever it was. Very fast race. That's the record. Okay, that's just under 154 miles an hour. That is an all-time record for Formula One. All right, Frank, do it. Give it to the guy who put it on the air. So we had it on the air on the slowdown lap. All-time fastest race in history, before Schumacher even gets out the car. And then the rest of the day, nothing. Nobody, no internet outlet reports it, nothing. And I thought, this is my first season. And I thought, I'm sure I've got this right. I've done the calculation like 4 times. I've reversed the formulas around. So it's like, reverse engineer it, and that's the right time. Everything, all the numbers work, but no one's reporting it. What's happened? So I had to write a groveling email to everybody saying, look, guys, I might have got this wrong. I'm sure I haven't, but no one's reporting it, and I can't understand why. It's such a big stat. So literally I was sitting there thinking, so this is the end of my career. It's been a lovely time working with all of you. I'll always be able to tell my grandkids I worked in Formula One, but thank you. And then the next morning, GrandPrix.com. Fastest Grand Prix in history at Monza yesterday. First thing I thought was, oh my God, that was close. and then the second thing was like, wow, okay, this guy's really useful. Because we had that before the cars had even stopped moving. So yeah, that was there was a big sliding doors moment in my career with getting a stat that might have been wrong, but it was a big call, and I'd worked out extensively. This is right. I'm sure it's right. I was standing by it, and then after that, I was like, okay, now my career took off from that moment. Like other countries started to get interested. Oh, we might be able to use this guy.
Well, it's such a different time now because you literally can just Google every stat you want, and you're not going to find the right answer every time. You're not going to find the right answer every time, but I tell you, it's getting better than it used to be. Like we all know Wikipedia, it can be manipulated by anybody, but you generally, the right answers, I think Google's algorithm or whatever tends to pop up quicker than the wrong answer. But I'm sure that's got to be part of what you deal with now, Sean.
Yeah, I would say my role has evolved less from being give us some numbers to sift through the morass of information. There's now so much information, not all of it right, as we're seeing in the greater context of world affairs.
Yeah.
So it's give us the relevant numbers, give us the right numbers, and be quicker about it than Twitter can be. You know, that's basically it. I basically say now, my job is boiled down to, can you beat Twitter? Can you come up with this stuff so that we're telling Twitter this before Twitter tells us? So we're the smart ones, you know. So that's that my job in a sentence is now that. Whereas previously, 20 years ago, before social media, you know, there was no one there to sort of go, hang on a minute, he's wrong. Now you'll know in a few seconds if you're wrong. So another context of that is I always tell the broadcasters, use the stat as written. Don't try and rewrite or reorder the stat as I've written it, because if you do, you might turn it from the correct stat to the incorrect stat, and then you're going to look stupid. Then you're going to shout at me and say it was wrong, and I'm going to tell you, no, it was right. What you said was wrong. What I gave you was right. So yeah, you're also going to have that. Sometimes have that conversation too.
You know, we'll move on to this year in a moment, but I just want to caveat what you've just been saying is that the other side of what you do is that, yeah, you might be able to present 10 pages of stats maybe before the weekend even starts. But I know, and having done it, you know, as close as yesterday, a 14-year-old won the Trans Am race in Nashville. And I beg for my producer or who's ever in my ear to be a stat guy, because on that last lap, if it's close, you know, I need somebody as the last. I don't have time to go to Google on the last lap of a race, and I don't have time unless I can pull it out of my head. I want somebody to tell my producer. I've been very lucky. I don't know if you know Pete Richards. He works with Frank Wilson too, but he's been one of the best producers I work with, because he has those stats both on paper and in his head. And while I was working with him, he would tell me on the last lap that never before has a guy from Pennsylvania who's 17 done this. And I'm able to get across the line and put that stat out, because there's no way in hell I would have been able to confidently say that. I might have thought it, and I might have thought, God, is he the youngest, or is he the, you know, but it needs that backup and that sort of, you know, teamwork for all of us to look good by putting out something that really is, you pulling it out nowhere, but adding immediately to that checkered flag moment with something really, really interesting that nobody had thought of, but really does enhance the broadcast. And so I just wanted to mention that's another side of this, which is so relevant.
Yeah, I know Pete, and I know Pete is as big of a geek for these numbers as I am, doing AMA Supercross and Formula E. You know, we know each other pretty well.
We did Moto America together.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, yeah. He's a big numbers guy. And you are right. By the way, there's somebody's dog's getting in on the argument.
What are the odds of that?
Yeah. Was correct. As soon as we mentioned Pete Richards, all hell broke loose, as usual. But just to add to that, much of the reason people hire me is because of what Jonathan said, which is having the confidence in the voice that's telling you. You know, like I say, a huge amount of it is, okay, if Sean's happy with it, we'll go with it.
Mhm.
It comes down to that, because as you know, Jonathan, when you're commentating, you don't have time to sort of have a committee meeting to discuss, what do you want? Should we say this or not?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, Sean's okay with it. Okay, well, let's go with it.
Yeah.
So it comes down to the trust that you build in the industry. So yeah, that's a huge part of it.
Yeah, and we all know this, is that if we get it wrong, somebody will know that we got it wrong, and they will let us know very quickly. So we know that's right. I mean, and that's the last thing we want to do, is get that wrong for people listening. So, well, guys,
yeah, what's quite funny, sorry to interrupt, what's quite funny is that people blame the commentators for operate. The satellite went out. There's too many commercial breaks. The commentators are deciding everything that's happening.
I got blamed for too many onboards yesterday.
Yeah. Martin Brundle came up to me in Austin one year and said, because it was the first year that it was the Sky coverage. He said, I've been getting like tweets saying like, why there's so many commercials in that first race of the year? Why did you do that? Like, I don't have anything to do with it. What are you talking about?
Well, Sean, I want to move on to this year, because one thing we said we want to talk about were some of your favorite stats of this year, and then maybe even some of your favorite stats of all time. But let's talk about this year, because we don't know if we're going to have an amazing year as we did last year. It's been interesting this year. It's been unpredictable with the new cars, but let's talk about some of your favorite stats of this year.
Blimey, favorite stats of this year. God, I don't know. Where are we up to? 13 races, I think.
Yeah.
I've got old man syndrome now. I'm 20 years into this. Now it's like, okay, I can talk to you very, very accurately about what happened in the 1987 Italian Grand Prix, but I don't remember what happened in last week's race. Was there a race last week? Where was it? It's like that now.
I can relate to that.
Yeah, nonetheless, it has been a very unusual season, a polarized season. We don't often get this, where one team and one driver leaps out to an enormous lead, and then it swings completely back the other way. Charles Leclerc, 46 points clear after Australia, driving for a Ferrari team that hadn't won a race in the previous 2 seasons. I mean, they hadn't won a race in this decade until Bahrain, whereupon they have a 1-2 finish. And this Red Bull suffering the mechanical malaises and so on. And then after Verstappen's car broke down again in Australia, he's 46 points clear in the championship. Now, normally, you would say that's normally an unassailable lead. It had been at least 10 years since the driver had been that far ahead in the championship and had it closed down. Coincidentally, also Ferrari, Fernando Alonso in 2012. And then we get to a point where Ferrari start shooting themselves in the foot. Now, it's one thing to say, all these mechanical failures and everything, but then Leclerc drops it all of his own accord at Paul Ricard, and then the Keystone Cops come in and run the strategy for Ferrari in Hungary. So they are literally throwing these points away now. Now it's not like, the car's really fast because it won't do the race distance. There's always that caveat when the car breaks down. Like, well, yeah, if you built the car to go the race distance, Red Bull would be faster than you. But now it's like, no, you're just spinning off and messing up your strategy. Like, what are you doing? One of my favorite stats of the year, I must admit, was in Paul Ricard when Leclerc went off. It was the 3rd time this year he'd retired from the lead of the race.
Yeah.
Now that car is called the Ferrari F175, and 75 was the number of points that Leclerc had lost from winning positions. So Leclerc gets a constant reminder every time he gets in the car of how many points he's lost while leading the race this year.
Yeah, that's good.
Which I think, Jonathan, is the context of which you are seeking.
Exactly. I would run with that.
Yep, comedy gold there.
And I wouldn't let the truth get in the way of a good story, because who's gonna? That's funny.
Right. I thought that was magnificent. So there was that, and then there's the more obscure stats that I get a kick out of, which they don't necessarily hit the highs, or they go under the radar a bit. Lewis Hamilton in Hungary led 3 or 4 laps there and broke one of the longest lasting records in Grand Prix, in World Championship history, not Formula One history. Most laps led at the same venue. Bill Vukovic led 485 laps at the Indy 500 when it was a World Championship event in the 50s. That record had stood, most laps led at a single venue in the World Championship, for 67 years, until Hamilton broke it in the Hungaroring last weekend, when he led like 3 laps and jumped over him, because he was only 2 laps behind him on the record. Now, stuff like that, I think that's fantastic, that we can cross-reference something that happened in the 1950s to something that's happened right now. So I always enjoy that sort of stuff as well. But I know again, that's old man's disease. Like people of a certain age think that's really cool, but you know, the Netflix generation, if you want to call them that, might find that slightly less interesting. In Bahrain, I mean, the Netflix generation, I think they really enjoyed this. Actually went viral when I said after Bahrain that Lewis Hamilton, after Bahrain, the first round of the year, led Verstappen in the championship by a larger margin than he had done at any stage in the previous season in 2021. All year he'd been trying to get away from him. And then the first round in 2022, with his supposedly uncompetitive Mercedes, he was further ahead of Verstappen than he'd ever been the previous year.
You know, I just, there's a one caveat I want to add, and it was a stat that kind of came to be in the heat of the moment. I was doing the Monaco historics with Alex Brundle just a few months ago, and we had for the first time what was called the Senna Group, which was the sort of more modern Formula One cars. And the stat was interesting because Americans don't have the grand status in Formula One compared to obviously the Europeans. That obviously they played a part. They've had, you know, world champions obviously with Mario and Phil Hill and so on. But the stat I love, which I really hadn't given a lot of thought to, but it makes sense, is that Ford and Cosworth have totally dominated Formula One with engines. So we now talk about the dominance of Honda and what's going on and Mercedes dominance. But if you really want to look at the Mac Daddy of engine suppliers in Formula One, especially in that period, it's Ford. And I love that for our audience here in America, who can go, yeah, that's right. Our engines have dominated Formula One for years.
Point of order here about American influence in Formula One. I'm very passionate about this subject because, and I said this on the stage in Miami. We did a Haas thing in Miami. Gunter was there, Mick Schumacher, Kevin Magnussen, and I went on before them. And basically, it was like a love letter to American F1 history, because I've said there is this pernicious attitude that Formula One is a European thing, and the Europeans let America borrow it, but you know, like a library book. You know, but you've got to bring it back in the condition that you took it out. You know, and we want it back. You can't keep it. It's always been like that. But the most successful Formula One engine of all time is the Ford DFE, as Jonathan mentioned. Right, between 67 and 83, 155 Grand Prix wins, multiple races where Ford Cosworth engines were the top six that took all the points in the race. That happened so many times. A lot of the time they're on Goodyear tires. Goodyear tires, Akron, Ohio, #1 all-time in Grand Prix wins, 368. And that was achieved in eras where they were not in a monopoly. Pirelli will eventually catch them here, but Pirelli have been in a monopoly since 2011. Goodyear were not. They had to compete against others, Michelin, Pirelli, Avon at one point, Dunlop, and so on. So that was Bridgestone right at the end, yeah. So that was another thing. And then there's the fact that there are two world champions from the US. Now, I accept that Mario Andretti was not born in the US. Phil Hill certainly was. That's as many. That means the US has got more world champions than France. The nation that invented Grand Prix racing only has one world champion, Alain Prost. But America's got two. And even if you argue that Mario Andretti doesn't count, it's still the same number as France. And America's had two world champions since Italy last had a world champion. So there's again, like there's this inferiority complex that Americans are erroneously led to have about Grand Prix racing that they should not have. Up until COVID in 2020, the US was the only nation to have 3 Grand Prix in the same year: 1982, Detroit, Las Vegas, and Long Beach. The film Rush, the Ron Howard film Rush, great film. Sure, most people have seen it. James Hunt, Niki Lauda, 1976, an iconic season. Now, no one watches that film and says it's too American, and yet you got 2 races in the United States: Long Beach and Watkins Glen. You've got Mario Andretti racing out there. You've got Penske racing out there. Penske won a race in 1976. I think Parnelli were there at the beginning of 76. There's the UAP Shadow Team owned by Don Nichols, an American. Right. You've got Goodyear tires winning all the races. You've got Ford Cosworth engines, the only people other than Ferrari winning any races. No one looks at that film and says, it's too American, you're ruining the sport. It's complete, it's nonsense. And that was the thing I said on the stage, is that, hey, America is not a bit part player it was fully in on this up until the race was pulled from Long Beach in '83, and that was commercial suicide, and that was the beginning of the rot. Up until '83, America was fully in. Eddie Cheever was on the podium in '83. American drivers were still on the podium regularly, and from then there became this great disconnect, where I still firmly believe was a somewhat engineered impact, so that everybody would think Bernie was right to take the race away from Long Beach. I'm going on a little bit of political rant here, not related to statistics, but does have a historical context. Then Liberty came along, bought the sport, bought the commercial rights to the sport, and the first thing you think of, a load of people from the US media side, they go, what the hell are we playing at? Why are we not in America? Like, look at what the Premier League has done. The English Premier League, 25 years ago, no one knew the English Premier League in this country. Bars didn't open, nothing, right? And now Premier League chipped away at it and really tried to push the American market. Now bars are open at 4 a.m. here to watch Liverpool play Fulham, and they're packed. So you can do it. So of course Liberty goes straight in and said, right, let's put things back the right way up here and get America back on the same page, because you got to come in here and really work it. There's so we all know in America there's so many things you can do entertainment wise. You've got to really work the market. Even the Beatles had to come over and play Ed Sullivan Theatre and play 700 gigs here to get big in the US. It's just the nature of the beach. If you want America, you can't just sit on your ass and say, well, come and get us. You've got to go out and really, really grab it.
You're absolutely right. Just a footnote on that, which you'll really enjoy and you can use for yourself anytime. I did a thing at Coda with Mario Andretti, and it just happened to be at a time where Rush was all the talk. And I brought it up and I said, there's been a lot of races. There's been a lot of films about motor racing. What did you think of Ron Howard's, film, Mario? And there was, of course, a big audience there. And he goes, I hate Ron Howard. He said, he never mentioned me. He goes, who won that race in Japan? I did. And he goes, not a mention, not one.
True story. Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, again, there's another American footnote to an iconic F1 season. There are so many examples up until the mid 80s where America was all in on Grand Prix racing. And in my opinion, the fault lies with Grand Prix racing. It is not the fault of Americans. If you pull everything that's great, pull all the great races out, and basically say, well, Americans, they don't get it. They only get driving around in circles. If you're going to treat the audience like that, guess what? They'll go and do something else. What do you expect them to do? If you systematically abuse the British audience, they'd switch off as well. There's nothing. This idea that Americans don't get Formula One or not interested was always wrong. It was always false, and it's just proven now with Drive to Survive. Everywhere we go, there's a bigger audience, but nowhere bigger has the difference than in the US. When I was on stage in Austin last year, I would start by saying, so hands up, who's at their first Grand Prix? And half the hands went up everywhere, every time I said that. And then I said, okay, now keep your hands up if you're here because of Drive to Survive. And they all kept their hands up. Now, there's also an attitude from the European side of things that that's a bad thing. And I cannot understand for the life of me why anyone would think that was a bad thing. I keep saying, guys, those mortgages that we like to pay, right? We get to pay that because of these people. They show up and they're interested, which means we're getting paid. So why are you being so negative about all these new fans? Formula One was turning grey for the longest time. Every time we go to a Grand Prix, every year, it's like the same fans were just getting greyer. And finally, Austin 2021, I did the pit walk and I was like, my God, there's teenagers here. And they're not here just for Hamilton or Verstappen. Like, they're Gasly fans or they're Norris fans. Like, they're so nuanced about it. They get a bad press. And I love that for 15 years, no one gave a crap what I did in America when I told them what I did for a living. And now I'm the most interesting person in the room. Now it's like, wow, what, you do Formula One? Oh, wow, that's amazing. Tell us more. Where previously they couldn't have cared less. It was, suddenly thanks Netflix for making me much more socially acceptable.
Hey, Sean, speaking of those, that young demographic, haven't you been fascinated watching the ESPN television stats about the 1849 demo? Because Formula One's, you probably know these numbers, but Formula One's been beating NASCAR and IndyCar pretty handily in that little 18 to 49.
Yeah. And again, it just highlights what I said. If you work on the market, I always said, look, the Premier League did this. I've been coming and going from the US since the year 2000 quite regularly, and I lived here full time since 07. And I know 20 years ago, I couldn't watch a Premier League game in this country. It would be almost impossible. And now I can watch all of them, every single one, and bars open early to do it, because the Premier League treated the US as being, we got to crack this market, come what may. And Formula One has now done it. It hasn't, I don't think it's reached the peak yet. There's more still to do. And obviously we've got the Las Vegas race next year, which is a paradigm shift in Formula One history in terms of the way that's going to work. But it goes to prove that the audience was always there. And if you treat them with respect that they deserve, not just like, oh, they're a bunch of idiots who don't get it, they just watch NASCAR all the time. They'll watch, they get it. America landed a man on the moon. You think they can understand 71 laps of a 2.5 mile track? I mean, give me a break.
When you say that paradigm shift, what exactly do you mean for Vegas?
Well, primarily the fact that every country I've been to this year, there are two questions that are prevalent. One, what did you think of what happened in Abu Dhabi last year? Which I get. Of course, they all want to know what really happened. What was your real opinion? And then the other one is, tell me about Las Vegas. This Las Vegas thing looks amazing, and it does. They raced in Las Vegas before, but it was a very, very half-baked version. Yeah. Chris Pook lost his hat on that promotionally. It was a great idea, and I think what they did in 81 and 82, well, what they're trying to do next year is what they wanted to do in the 80s, but of course it never happened that way, and it was just this horrible, like, hang on a minute, this is what we signed up for type of event. Now they're going to do it properly, and now everybody goes, oh, that's going to be the in terms of a race, it's just another race. But in terms of an event, I think every race promoter in the world is looking at it and saying, okay, now how do we move with this? If this is the competition now, we've got to up our game as well. You know, everyone's doing, and it's great. Also, I always said the US should have 3 races. Now it has 3 races in 3 time zones. Europeans don't understand how far apart everything is in this country. The idea that, you know, why does the US get 3 races? Well, they're further apart than all of the European races, and there's 8 races in Europe. So what's the problem?
You know, and Sean, I think you hit it on the head there, you know, with Vegas. I'm not a big fan of gambling myself or necessarily going to Vegas. It is what it is. But I will say one thing. If you want the American audience to sit up and take seriously what you're offering, then the one piece of tarmac that you can take over and be taken seriously is the Strip at Vegas, because everybody knows what that's worth to money, to gambling, and to preeminent, you know, and to preeminence in America. So if you tell people that you're going to race the Strip at Vegas, everybody, all bets are off. Everybody gets it. Yeah,
and also another question I get asked is, what's the best race to go to? And I always say, it depends what type of experience you want. And this is another type of experience for Grand Prix racing. It's just the ultimate. You could say it was somewhat kitsch and, you know, almost, some people would consider it tacky. But I also think, look, deep down, you all want to be there. Don't give me this whole or whatever. I don't want, you totally want to be there. Trust me.
Of course you do.
It's like Monaco. People who go about poo-poo Monaco, like, yeah, you wish you were on the yacht. Come on, go be honest.
Be honest.
So yeah, but then that doesn't. In COTA is obviously well established as a US venue. To me, I don't see it as a threat to COTA because they're 2 completely different type of events. I've shopped the idea that if you want the glitz and the glamour and all that sort of stuff, gambling, shows, a lot, go to Vegas. If you want the music festival, you want Coachella, Glastonbury, you go to either Austin or you go to Silverstone. And both of those races are massively attended. The atmosphere is incredible. And then if you want like something boutique, very, very, you know, small, but like a jewel, go to Bahrain or go to Abu Dhabi. You know, you get all these different experiences. So the fact that we add these different experiences, to me, it does not detract from what COTA offers, for instance. COTA still has this unique selling point. Like, because there will be people who look at them and say, I kind of rather go to a real racetrack and see what the cars can really do at a purpose-built venue. I want to see them in the wild, as I call it. Go and watch F1 cars in the wild. Don't see them in a zoo like a street track. Just go and see them in the wild. So there's still, I hope, hopefully Bobby Epstein and the promoters, F1, you know, in Las Vegas, they're not going to be competing for an audience there, that they can complement each other. And of course, there's Miami as well. So they're far enough apart and different enough experiences that hopefully they will all, the rising tide will lift all the ships.
A quick story about what you're talking about, Vegas. I was at a real estate meeting the other day, nothing to do with Formula One. And somebody found out what I do, and they were just immediately, oh, I'm a new fan. And the whole conversation, everyone at the table, there was about 6 people. I think there were 3 that were all brand new fans because of Netflix. And everybody was then talking about Vegas. What's it going to be like? How are they going to do it? How much have they bought? Because, somebody knew they had purchased some real estate. So you're right about the trajectory. I think we still have not seen the peak. Jonathan and I have talked about this. We don't know what the peak is going to, is it going to come soon? Is it just going to keep going up? But with Vegas coming online, I think that's going to keep the trajectory in the upward direction. And I think Vegas is just going to blow the ratings out of the water. I think it's going to be crazy.
Yeah, if they play the cards right, no pun intended, it should be the highest rated Formula One race in US TV history. And it's certainly the most eagerly anticipated new event we've ever had of any description. And to me, I mean, all 3 of us here are been sort of long-term invested in Formula One fortunes in the US. And we can remember times in the late 2000s when there was no race here. And it just seemed like that we were on the night shift, basically. Like, okay, there's like everybody over the age of 40 who can remember going to Watkins Glen, who's still watching F1. We're doing it for them. But now this whole sort of new Jerusalem of new audience, that exists in the hinterland. And it's such an exciting time to be involved. I feel like we're almost getting our reward for seeing it through the doldrums. Now we've really caught the tailwind, and we're absolutely going for it and
it happened overnight. I mean, it literally in the last 18 months is what it feels like. I know it's a little further than that, but it's just incredible the speed at which it happened.
Yeah, definitely. I think paradoxically, the COVID lockdown helped, of course, because everybody was just sat watching Netflix, so they watched that. But you are right. I mean, I felt like things were on the uptick in 2019. But then when I came back to the track in 2021, it was suddenly like, no, there's been a paradigm shift here. The demographic has changed, not just the numbers of people showing up, but also the type of people showing up. Now we've got, college students showing up. Now we've got, there's like 12-year-olds wearing their Daniel Ricciardo hats. It's like, I thought, this is fantastic. These are the people who are going to be the custodians of the sport for the next 50 years, when people like me are 6 feet under, and I often thought to myself, as we all die off, there's going to be nobody new because, we haven't bothered getting kids interested. And now, wow, I know a lot of people online scoff about it and say, oh, these kids, they don't know what they're talking about. And I always say, well, hang on a minute. Since when were we the gatekeepers for Formula One fandom? You don't have to pass a test. If you like Formula One because of stats, great, you're welcome. If you like Formula One because of Drive to Survive, great, you're welcome. If you like Formula One because, shiny cars go roundy, hey, you're welcome too. It doesn't matter why you're here as long as you're really enjoying it and you feel like it's worth watching.
Great point.
Good luck to you.
Great point.
So I promised we wouldn't go too much beyond an hour. We're approaching that. But Sean, I want to ask you, what about some of your favorite all-time stats of some sort? I mean, I know you've got a zillion, but what's near and dear to your heart?
Probably most of them are from my early days because it was still at a stage then when I was having to prove myself as being useful around here. I mentioned the one about the fastest race. In 04, second season in Montreal, Peter Windsor used to do the TV unilateral when he would interview the top 3 drivers. And I was asked late in that race, have you got anything we could open to Michael Schumacher with? Because Schumacher was in the business of hoovering up all of the Grand Prix that year. It was the ridiculously one-sided year when he won 13 races. Have you got anything good we could open to Michael with? Now, Michael Schumacher did not care about statistics. It just wasn't his thing. I told Peter, I said, well, look, this is going to be, it's going to be his 7th win in Montreal today. No one's ever won at a Grand Prix. No one's ever won at the same place 7 times, ever, in Formula One history. He's going to be the first guy ever to do that. Why don't you try that? So he opened. He said, Michael, congratulations on another victory. I don't know if you know this, but You've won 7 times here. That's the Formula One first. No one has ever done that in history. And to my shock and amusement, Michael sat back in his chair and went, huh, I didn't know that. That's pretty cool. I like that. I was like, thanks, Michael. That's just helped my career no end. I got a reaction out of Michael Schumacher about a statistic. So there was that. Jonathan was talking about the relevance of statistics in the US market just earlier with the Ford thing. When I was doing the CBS races in 05 and 06, we were on the network. So it was obvious that, okay, we're trying to steer this in the direction of being interesting for an American casual viewer. We were doing the Spanish Grand Prix in 06, which was a very processional race, as races at Catalonia tend to be, because it's a test facility and so on. And late in the race, Barrichello and Button, who were racing for Honda, were running in 5th and 6th place. And I thought, what can I do here? This, you know, we've flogged everything to death. What are we going to talk about in this last segment before the checkered flag? I thought, when was the last time 2 Hondas were in the points? Because Honda had come back as an official manufacturer that year. And I realized it was Mexico 65. So it hadn't happened for 41 years. But it gets better, because what happened from then, Mexico 65, the 2 point scorers were Richie Ginther, who won the race, it was his first win, and Ronnie Buckland. So it was 2 American drivers. And then Ginther took the win. It was the first of the 368 wins for Goodyear. So it was a landmark event in American Formula One history. So I was able to cross-reference this relatively obscure race with something that really, really mattered to American F1 history. So we were able to go off on a tangent and talk about American contributions to F1. And it was one of those moments where I felt like I've just justified the reason why I'm in the room, because I was able to steer us in that direction without like,
that's cool,
without it being a hard left turn away from what we're talking about. It's like cross-references what we're looking at on the track right now. So I always thought that was one of the more like tricky stats that I ever managed to make it out onto the air. And given the circumstance, it was like, yeah, that one made to measure. Thank you very much indeed. Yes.
That's a pretty cool one.
Did the wave in the gallery. Thank you very much.
Hey, before we go, Jonathan texted me and reminded me, we got to ask you what your opinion on the Andretti global F1 effort, because when this first came out, I was like, are you kidding me? This should be a slam dunk. They should welcome him and the hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of sponsorship that will follow an American Andretti team into the sport. And everybody's quibbling about this. Oh, the $200 million fee is not enough that they're going to charge. But I mean, this is still going on and we don't know what the answer is going to be. What do you think about this whole situation?
Well, first and foremost, I don't think that there's any xenophobia applied to this. I don't think it's any anti-American sentiment regarding the entrance of an Andretti team. Yes, I think the what you just did there is most appropriate. It is all about money. The politics pertain to money, and I get it, because at the moment you're splitting the cake 10 ways. Now, if you're splitting the cake 11 ways with Johnny come lately who's just arrived in the room, you're thinking, hang on a minute. We've been here for years. We've put in the long shifts here, and suddenly this guy walks in and gets 1/11 of the revenue. That's not fair.
But it's Johnny come lately Andretti, so
it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. You're still looking at the bottom line of this, and it's not just like Mercedes and Ferrari you're talking about. It's teams like Williams who they exist to race. That is their sole purpose, to race. Now, the Andretti name is a big name, and we're all fairly confident that A, they're good for the long term, and B, they're good for the money. So like they're not some bunch of cowboys who decided let's make a team. So they've got that going for them. With that said, and no disrespect intended to any of the Andretti family or their contribution to the sport's history, it is not. I don't think now it is as important to have that name in Formula One as it might have been 10 years ago, because of the brand recognition that now extends to Lewis Hamilton or to Max Verstappen in the US market. The fact that I go to airports now and I see, billboards that have McLarens on them, I'm like, wow, I mean, that didn't have that years ago. You might have had it at Austin Airport, but not in Philadelphia, for instance. So it would not be the be all and end all. I mean, there's already an American team in Formula One, except that the brand is not as well recognized as the name Andretti would be. So to me, it is the same as if Porsche wanted to make an 11th team instead of buying in with Red Bull. I think you'd still be hitting these same problems. And I totally understand it. But at the same time, I still think the racer people like Zach Brown and Toto Wolff, the racer, if they put their racer hat on, it'd be like, yeah, we'd love the Andretti name in Formula One, but I've got to put my CEO hat on and say, hang on a minute, whoa. What about the numbers? I've got to report this back to somebody, and I can't be turkeys voting for Thanksgiving here with our revenues. We've got to secure our existence. So in summary, I think some of the stuff is bluster. It's a better story if we say, they don't want Andretti in the sport, they're scared of them, or they just don't they don't like Americans. It's a better headline. When actually it's much more business. Look, business is business. Passion's great, but we're talking hundreds of millions of dollars here. And I understand if somebody said to me, hey, do you want to work with Mario Andretti, but also you've got to take a $75 million pay cut? I'd say, thanks, Mario, but no thanks. Or thanks, Michael, but no thanks. So I hope they work it out, because it'd be great to have them in the sport, because they are, as I mentioned, a legitimate team. It's not just some like pro-am half-baked effort. It's like, okay, we know Michael Andretti knows what he's doing.
That sums up this whole conversation, because we started by saying, hey, isn't it great? We've got this tailwind. Formula One has finally arrived in America. And there is a sentiment that the way you've just framed that says to me, hey, guys, this company is exploding. And Michael Andretti says, great, we'll join in now. Because I'd like a little bit of equity in that company, because obviously you guys are going places, and the other 10 going, oh, ho, ho.
Yeah, I think actually there was a lot of talk, you'll be familiar, that they almost bought the Sauber Motorsport operation, AKA Alfa Romeo. And I think Sauber got talked off the ledge with that, because up until the last 18 months or so, having a Formula One team is basically been like shoveling cash into a black hole. Mm-hmm. It's just like just throwing good money after bad money and just trying to keep things afloat. But now we have financial regulations in the sport. And now suddenly these companies know the cost of doing business. We cannot exceed 142.5 million, I think it is this season. And now suddenly, okay, we can make this a profitable venture. And with the wind tunnel time, finish lower in the championship, get more wind tunnel time than the team that finishes at the front. There's a little bit more equity. Not equity, that's not the right term. It's a little bit fairer, you might say. Yeah. So I think if that hadn't been in place, Sauber would have sold to Andretti. They would have said, thank you very much. Done. We're out of here with our however many hundreds of millions Michael Andretti would have given to them. But I think Sauber were talked out of it, because they thought, hang on a minute, you want to sit on this asset right now, because the way this is going, this is going to accrue, this is going to actually appreciate in value in ways it's never done before. And now you see Andretti said, okay, right, well, we'll enter as our own team. And now everybody's like, no, you can't do that, because they're all thinking, hang on a minute, we're making money now. Whereas previously, it wouldn't have applied, because they would have, under the previous regulations, they would have joined, and it would have been like, okay, you get no benefits whatsoever for the first 3 years, and you've got to finish in the top 10 in the Constructors' Championship to get them anyway. And everyone would have said, yeah, fine, whatever. Now it's like, no, we're onto a good thing. Please don't interrupt. The money's coming in. We like this. Please make it continue. So that's a sign of changing times in Formula One. And I would say this, of course I would say this because Liberty pay the bills for me to an extent. I do think it's great. There are a lot of things Liberty have done to safeguard the future of the sport. And this is one of them, the financial regulations, the fact that we're having this conversation about, whoa, we want fewer teams. We don't want another team coming in because we're all making money, instead of, holy crap, how are we going to pay the bills? Are we going to make it to the next Grand Prix? Austin 2014, we only had 18 cars. So, we were running out of teams. So we are in a ridiculous position right now where a team as good as Andretti could be told, hang on a minute, put the brakes on. We might not want you as much as we thought. Whereas 10 years ago, it would have been red carpet treatment. Please come right this way, Mr. Andretti.
Yeah, you're right.
Well, I think you're spot on about the money side of it. That's it. It's completely. I still think that Andretti could make up that money, divide the pot by 11. You're still going to make more money. That's just my gut. But how do I know that really? But you're right. The conversation is about money, and Sean, if you don't know the stats, we need to all look them up. I remember seeing at the beginning of the year when the new Netflix season came out, the number they came out and said after 2 weeks, it had been viewed like by 50 million people or some crazy number. We have to look that one up because that's what all this boils down to. But that was just one of those incredible stats that I was like, I need to have more time to look that up. But that was incredible. But
can I ask, have either of you watched all of the episodes?
Not this year. I'm kind of slowing down. Have you watched them all, Jonathan?
No, I haven't started the final, the latest series yet.
I've only seen the first episode they ever made. I saw the Haas episode from 2018. That's the only episode of Drive to Survive I've ever watched.
You're kidding.
Oh, it's great. No. You should watch it.
The thing is to me, it's a documentary about work, and I don't need to see it because I already know what happened. So I don't need to watch it again. But the thing is, and I keep making this point to everybody, it's not made for people like me. It's made for people who they know Formula One exists, but they don't necessarily watch it. And to see what that show has done for this sport, you know, when you got 400,000 people coming into COTA and the place is rammed full to the point where the infrastructure is collapsing, you know, the Wi-Fi doesn't work anymore and we can't get in and out of it because just so many people want to come in and watch this. That's amazing. And it doesn't need people like me to watch it for it to be an amazing success story. You know, it harks back to what I said earlier about, look, different Grand Prix offer different experiences. Drive to Survive is watching Formula One as a different experience. I personally would be more of a Legends of Motorsport type guy, you know, to Alain de Cadenet, God rest his soul. You know, like I'd rather talk about so that gearbox that Ferrari were running at 72 Belgian Grand Prix is really, really interesting. I'm a nerd for that stuff. I'm not for the crash bang wallop of Drive to Survive. But if other people are, that's great. And it's brought so many new people in. I hope they keep making it. And I hope people still get angry about the fact that they're still making it because it's doing an incredible job. It's been the biggest, best recruitment tool that Formula One has ever had.
You're right.
By far.
Yeah. And I hope everyone I speak to, and I don't know what your experiences are in Texas. Here in California, when I meet fans who said we started watching it because of Drive to Survive, they say, "Oh, we don't miss a race now. We get up and watch every race. We don't miss one." They're not just like, "Oh, well, we'll switch it on." They're like, "No. We're thinking of going to Suzuka next year." I'm like, what?
Yeah, I know what you mean.
Yeah, I met the receptionist in my gym was never interested in Formula One. And then suddenly, earlier this year, she said, "I'm going to the Spanish Grand Prix. Have you got any recommendations?" And I went, "What? I'm going to be at the Spanish Grand Prix. What? This is mad, you know." So yeah, it's totally changed things for the better. And I just, yeah, what an amazing time to be an F1 fan in America. It's so exciting.
Well, thinking of changing things for the better. Boy, I can't talk. Thank you for changing things for the better for our sport with all the stats that you've poured into the ears of the commentators that have spit them out over the years. We thank you for that. Yeah, including Jonathan and I and Bob Marcia.
Bob's had earache at my expense for 10 years at Speak Channel. So yeah, well, I appreciate it. But as I always say, as I said at the start, you know, our job is to complement the action, not to replace the action. We're here. We are not the headline. But anytime we can cross-reference what something Max Verstappen has just done with something that Jackie Stewart did, or Juan Manuel Fangio, you know, or Alberto Ascari, it's always like, look at that, you know. And all these new fans might go, "Fangio, I've never heard of him. So look him up. Who's that guy?" And they might disappear down a YouTube rabbit hole, and then the next time you see them, they'd be like, "So that Mercedes W196 Streamliner, huh?" You know, and then suddenly you've got, you know, now they've turned into geeks about it. You know, now they're like, "So yeah, that 1-2 on the debut with Carl Kling, wow, and that REM circuit was incredible. Going around the fields, oh wow, I've got to go and visit there in my rental car one day."
Thank goodness for the internet rabbit holes. Well, Sean Kelly, thank you very much. This has been really fun. Hour flew by. And I'm sure we'll talk to you again soon.
I look forward to it. Hopefully you'll have me back. It's been a pleasure, guys. Thank you very much indeed.
Perfect.